Whenever you're stuck on an obstacle in a Dragon Quest game, there's a choice to be made. Do you A, work on your strat, or do you B, level up your characters? But what would happen if you kept choosing option A? Today's playthrough is 5 years in the making. This is Dragon Quest XI at the lowest possible level. I've routed the game to require the least amount of total level ups. That's the main number to look out for, but when applicable I've also tried to delay level ups for as long as possible. There are a few more nuances that I'll explain along the way, but the only 2 extra rules that I put in place to make this video watchable are that I'm disallowing stat increasing seeds and that I'm banning horse spinning, which is a completely game breaking glitch that would skip not only large chunks of the game but also 2 level ups. I'll explain how exactly this alternate route works near the end, and by then I think you'll come to understand that it would have been much less interesting. Even if rapidly spinning your horse against certain geometry to go out of bounds is the most video game thing ever. That number in the top right is the death counter, which is going to help illustrate the different levels of challenge, and I'm putting a link to the raw footage for all the bosses in the description. There's a lot of details that I can't cover here since the video would become way too long. So if you're wondering about something specific that I didn't mention here, that's where to look. The last qualifier I need is that I'm only going to be counting level ups during the main acts, not the interludes. And now we can already get right into the first act. This odyssey starts in the town of Cobblestone with a coming of age ceremony. We play as the luminary who has to make his way up Cobblestone Tor. Luckily, he has the help of his childhood friend, her dog, and a few special rewards that you get for playing the definitive edition. The notable ones are the Trudane outfit and 5 pep pops. The armor gives bonus HP, which is very impactful early on, the headband gives bonus MP, so I'm going to replace it relatively soon, and pep pops are consumable that peps up every active party member, which is an incredibly powerful effect, just not right now while I only have 1 party member. And before I can get another, there are 2 forced encounters. And in case you're wondering, yes, I did skip the story for this playthrough. The first encounter consists of 3 slimes which give 6 EXP. The second consists of 2 smogs which give 40 EXP, leveling the luminary up to 3. For these 2 fights you have 2 guest NPCs at your side, which are AI controlled extra party members that can't die. Gamma heals you when you're low on HP, Sandy does better damage than the luminary, and on top of that, this is the part of the game where you're supposed to be at level 1. You'd have to be trying to lose here. That means the luminary has come of age and is ready to make his way to Heliodor Castle, where he promptly gets thrown into jail, immediately escapes and is now on the run alongside a dude named Erik, our first party member. Although there's nothing of note about him. Usually the next stop would be to go back up into Heliodor to try and find an orb, but before that I made my way down to a sparkly spot. These hold items and most of them respawn every 15 minutes, only certain spots take longer, and this one holds Sleeping Hibiscus, which is an item that has a 60% base chance of putting an enemy to sleep. It's going to be essential against a certain boss and useful against most. Long story short, I make it a point to pick one up whenever it respawns, and this is the first spot I can frequent. It's only a shame getting disappointed in Heliodor doesn't even take 15 minutes, meaning the journey leads us past the sparkly spot before it respawns and into the Mangle Grove. While I don't have any interest in the loot scattered around, once we reach the campsite it's time to prepare for the first boss. And to do that, we have to get familiar with forging. This game's version of alchemy, especially in the definitive edition, has a few nuances that make it essential for my cause. For one, you can automatically buy any buyable ingredient that you're missing. That means you can make an item that you wouldn't be able to make yet since there's no way to get an ingredient, but because some store later on sells that material, the game lets you auto buy it in the forging screen. Also, equipment you forge does not only get made, there's also a chance for you to improve its stats during a mini game. Depending on how well you do, it can go up to +3. But since how well you can forge depends on the luminary's level, I'm going to fail at that a lot. The game does however allow you to rework items, which not only gives you a new chance, but reworking is easier than making something from scratch. If you get a result that would make a +1 weapon, while you're reworking a +1 weapon, it will instead turn into a +2 weapon. That means if later on I'm unable to get anything beyond a +1 on a Demon's Bane, I can rework it 3 times and still get a +3 weapon out of it. But for now, forging is just a way for me to upgrade my gear, something I surprisingly won't be doing that much in this playthrough. I gave a bronze sword to both party members and taught Erik Flame Slash, since that's his best damage option at this level. But that does not yet mean I can fight the next boss. There are 3 more steps. I went and bought a whole bunch of medicinal herbs since they're strictly better than wasting MP on the heal spell right now. The money isn't an issue in this playthrough since I know what I can afford to sell, so for the rest of this just assume I have however much gold I need. Selling is really undervalued. People get scared of selling the thorn whip that you won't be able to get back later on in case they ever want to use it again, but unlike with alchemy, you never use equipment as an ingredient for forging. The only exceptions are special weapons that you physically can't sell, meaning there's nothing you will ever lock yourself out of. And if you give selling a shot, you'll come to realize that gold is not tight in the least. The second thing I want to do is get pepped. It's something I've alluded to earlier, but pep powers are this game's equivalent of crack cocaine. You either get pepped up once per battle after taking around 80% of your max HP in a single attack, which might be an important mechanic for playthroughs with all draconian quests, but it rarely matters here. Or you randomly get pepped up at the start of an action. The chance isn't very high, but peps stay after you leave combat. That means I can find a willing participant, defend in their face. A lot of people don't know this, but you can press A to skip text and speed up battles, something I only started doing later on as I got more impatient, but whether you do it or not, you will eventually get pepped up. Then you can flee from the battle and you stay pepped up outside of combat. It's always beneficial to start a battle pepped, and the only reason I will enter some fights without peps is because I'm either expecting them to be so easy that it's not worth bothering, or it's because I don't have a good pep power available. Pep powers are the big payoff. Special moves with game-changing effects, but I sadly don't have access to most of the good ones in this one since they require party members to know certain abilities which in turn would require a level. But that's not quite it with prep work. There's one last thing I have to do before I can fight the tricky devil, and that is to not only save, but to then exit to the title screen, to then load the save and thereby create an autosave since I'm playing under the assumption that I'll die a lot to each boss. If you start from your last save after dying to the tricky devil, you'd respawn at that location with half your gold and without peps. If you instead load an autosave, you keep everything. That's why there's only one instance in this entire playthrough where I restart from the last save, else I will always be retrying via loading the last autosave. And all of that was required for me to start attempting the not so tricky devil. He does have 2 spells that can pose a problem, but as you've seen I had prep time and I know exactly when he's going to use what. For example, his first action every fight is the Sys spell. Almost all bosses in this game follow patterns that you can learn, but that is one of the many aspects that I won't extensively cover for the sake of concision. Either way, I start my attempts with a Sleeping Hibiscus. If it hits, it allows me to get some free damage via spells which don't wake enemies up. I can then follow that up with the Real Decoy, which is the only pep power available right now. But it is a decent one, doing about 60 out of the tricky devil's 148 points of HP. What is tricky however is an implicit part of this challenge. I can't just win a fight with everyone alive. Dead party members don't gain EXP, meaning I need the hero to be dead when I kill the tricky devil. This means I have to vaguely count his HP and hope that he kills the luminary at the right moment. If the tricky devil's heals were unpredictable, this would be a nightmare. And luckily there's one more trick that I'll be utilizing throughout the entire playthrough. I can manipulate enemy targeting priority by switching around my party members. The person in front is more likely to get targeted, meaning if I put the hero in the front, the tricky devil's single target attacks are more likely to hit him instead of Erik. You can even adjust it mid-combat depending on what your party member's HP looks like. I ended up beating the tricky devil on my first try, meaning 102 EXP are going towards Erik. The hardest part was timing its death, but I can count. So far this playthrough is still pretty relaxed. I made 0 deaths and as you can see my equipment wasn't that great simply because it didn't need to be. That's going to have to change right away though. Our journey leads us to the Emerald Cove where not only more Sleeping Hibiscus and the most wonderful to gaze at enemies, but the next boss waits in a nearby dungeon. In preparation for the fight I bought some stronger armor and a broadsword for the hero, meaning he's going back to great swords. I grabbed the strength ring and the Templar uniform from the dungeon and I tried getting pepped up against the nearby enemies, which turned out to be a mistake. I died a grand total of 3 times trying to get pepped up, but since I front loaded all the information about my little pre-fight ritual, I can already start talking about the Grim Griffins. This is a fight that a lot of new players struggle with. The game throws 2 aggressive enemies at you and if they kill one of your party members early on, there's no way to come back from that. Luckily, since my party members are under the effect of basically crack cocaine, I can out aggro them. So the game plan is to use the real decoy and quickly kill one of them, and from there on medicinal herbs outheal whatever the second one tries. Something to pay attention to that you will see a lot throughout the run is that my hero is holding a shield and no weapon. That is because you can switch equipment in the middle of combat, and if you're using a greatsword you can swap to a shield on actions where you're using an herb and not directly utilizing the weapon. When you do want to attack you can always switch right back, meaning there's no good reason to ever not take the extra defense and block chance. In this fight I died once and it resulted in 330 EXP going towards the hero, leveling him up to 6. Surprisingly, that makes 4 deaths already. And this was just the tutorial. It's only now that we move on to the real meat of the game through the door of departure. The next area is called Hoddo and it's where we complete our first and only side quest in this playthrough. It's one where you gather iron ore to get recipes for iron gear, very simple to complete and the reward is the best gear for now. So I completed that, forged new weapons and armor. Somewhere along the way Serena and Veronica started tagging along and they're guest NPCs for now, which is going to help a great deal with the upcoming boss. But also, while getting pepped up they happened to kill the enemies I was trying to get pepped up against, which is another reset. Either way, the next boss is Jarvis and a couple of his buddies. My approach starts off very similar to what I did against the Grim Griffins, meaning I try to kill the shadows as soon as possible. But afterwards I do a sharp 180, let Erik die and start playing extremely slowly. The reason for that is that Serena and Veronica as guest NPCs are incredibly strong. If I were to just defend, Veronica would still slowly be clubbing him to death. Now if Erik was still alive, Serena might heal him instead of the hero, and that's the only scenario that might lead to a reset. Guest NPCs never run any risk of dying. Jarvis has no status effects and Serena never runs out of MP for healing. Also, this is one of the cases where I'll have to do a short pattern talk, which I can afford to since it's only 3 moves long, tied for the simplest boss pattern in the game. He first attacks, then he randomly attacks or breathes in, and then he does a breath attack. Now, if he breathed in on the second action, that breath attack will do double damage, which can high roll and one-shot the hero, even through the Trodain armor increasing his max HP. Long story short, I defend when he breathes in, else I attack or heal. But again, only with the hero, which makes this fight take a bit longer than it should have. It was however incredibly safe, meaning after my first try 670 EXP are going towards the Luminary, leveling him up to 8. And this is where Serena and Veronica graduate from being guest NPCs. Their newly acquired mortal status allows them to be the last one standing when I kill a boss, so they can soak up some EXP. Serena has the Dazzle spell, Veronica has the Sap spell, and that's everything of note these two bring to the table. And that might make it apparent why I didn't give Erik an introduction, since he does nothing except bad damage. I might have a full 4-man party, but they are all terrible at base level, which makes the upcoming boss a bit of a challenge. The kingdom of Gallopolis is in a crisis, so we go and fight a boss with the help of the most fabulous guest NPC you'll ever get. Oh, you wanted to hear about the story? Too bad that I skipped it, just like I skipped getting pepped up for this fight, which in hindsight I shouldn't have. Since Erik hasn't yet learned Rubble Wowzer, the real decoy is still the best pep power I have, and while 60 damage is not much right now, it's still something. Shortening the fight even by a little would have helped, since the Slayer of the Sands is 100% in control during this fight. He can decide that your run is over and he made the decision a few times. Problem is, I wanted to give this skill to Veronica since she doesn't level up from it. You can probably see how it's a problem when he one-shots her with a desperate attack and I have no way of reviving her. I just have to hope he doesn't. There are ways of increasing my odds. Veronica could even block, but I usually can't afford to lose their tempo. And of course there's the Dazzle spell. He can 100% crit me through Dazzle and he can also just not get affected by Dazzle, but I try to keep it up anyways. Sleeping Hibiscus is sometimes useful, but you have to do it after Sylvando's but before the Slayer's action, so you have to keep track. Otherwise Sylvando will attack the sleeping Slayer and wake him up, meaning you wasted an action. What does synergize nicely with Sylvando is Sap, which I'm going to be using whenever applicable, in other words almost always. Reducing the Slayer's defense turns Sylvando's damage from pathetic to reasonable. Now with all of that said, it took me 9 tries to beat the Slayer, which is more than I expected. Mostly to Veronica getting crit, but twice I accidentally beat him too soon, which of course forces a restart as well. I didn't bust out the calculator until postgame because I wanted the footage to be watchable, so you'll see a couple more of these premature kills since I ended up rounding a whole lot while counting in my head. Either way, 1440 EXP go towards Veronica. And now we get our first real party member. Finally someone with a skill tree that matters. Reallocating parts of your skill tree allows you to do some gymnastics and it's basically free of charge. Sylvando will permanently gain 10 extra skill points by reaching a panel on the bottom of his tree, so that's the first order of business. Afterwards, what most people do is get Hustle Dance, a powerful AoE heal, but given how everyone besides Sylvando is awful, I don't want to invest in keeping them alive. Instead, I opted to teach Sylvando Cobra Strike and Victimizer, one knife skill that poisons an enemy and another that does 6 times damage if they're already poisoned. A really popular combination is to use Cobra Strike with Sylvando and Victimizer with Erik. But given Erik's current state, Sylvando has to do everything himself. Not to mention his strength is way higher than you might expect, which is something I'll need in order to compensate for gear becoming too hard to upgrade. This is the point where the requirements outscale the hero by too much and I can't upgrade anything anymore. Now, something happens in the story, I just know it involves children, but the next fight is against the Colossus, which isn't really a boss fight to be honest, but I still had to reset once because I killed him too soon on accident. Either way, this results in 704 EXP going towards Sylvando. Returning to Gondolia, we're faced with a couple of soldiers, which a lot of people don't know you can just lose against. The game progresses the same, regardless of the battle's outcome. Anyways, the next boss is Jasper. This is another fight I'm starting Pep since Sylvando brought with him one of the best Pep powers in the game. The fight fantastic boosts your whole party's attack by 2 stages and requires the hero and Sylvando to be pepped up. My second best option for attack increases is wasting my most valuable action, meaning Sylvando's, for 1 stage on 1 party member. I only want a buff on Sylvando and kinda on the Luminary, but being able to use the Luminary's action to buff Sylvando by not 1 but 2 stages is insane tempo. Jasper here has 630 HP. Sylvando using Victimizer with a store-bought weapon does around 300 damage without sap and up to 400 with it. But while I kill Jasper quickly, he does the same to me, one-shotting every party member except for Sylvando. You can't dazzle him, so the only strat was to use buff on the Luminary and to defend with him until I got the opportunity for the finishing blow. He also uses a move to increase his parry chance, and if he parries that finishing blow, I just die. Now that might sound terrible, but it really wasn't that bad. There was one death where he parried everything and one time I killed him too soon, but it ended up being very reasonable. Fun fact, there's also an alternate win con where if you reduce his MP to 0 he stops functioning, which is surprisingly easy to achieve. But if I did that, then I'd have to time him running out of MP with everyone besides the Luminary dying, which is borderline impossible. One way or another, this means 2000 EXP are going to the Luminary who levels up to 11. And this is the first part of the routing that's not entirely intuitive, since Sylvando wouldn't get a level from this kill. Sylvando can, however, also soak up 3000 EXP from another boss pretty soon, which will leave the hero at 1000 EXP less in the long run, which will save me a level up in the grand scheme of things. A big part of routing this is level edging, finding ways to give the non-Luminary party members as much of the forced EXP as possible without them leveling up. And this is one of the cases where I can only achieve that by getting these levels sooner. And if you're wondering why I gave this EXP to the hero instead of someone like Serena, it's because the Luminary is forced to gain EXP in a few events like the upcoming one, meaning it might give 3 levels now, but it won't be a single level by the end of this playthrough. I did allude to the upcoming event, but before that I have an addiction to feed. Welcome to the world's worst casino, where the customer always wins. The slots here are rigged so far in your favor that I can play a round of poker to earn some starting tokens and then send an auto clicker to work on the slots, come back 8 hours later and be rich. This gets me a whole bunch of Yggdrasil leaves, which I surprisingly didn't really end up using, Mercury bandanas, which are okay headgear, and most importantly the Platinum Power Sword. This is the Luminary's best weapon in Act 1. Further, since he leveled up to 11, I can also teach my little Pokemon Cutting Edge, which is an attack that does double damage, so now he's gone from doing almost no damage to putting out decent numbers. There's a recipe in Gondolia for gold chains and a recipe for Resilient armor in some runes that we can access, so I grab both of those and fully outfit the Luminary. Resilient armor not only looks great, but it has way more defense than you expected to have at this point, even at +0. Gold chains on the other hand are a really overlooked accessory. It slightly boosts your max HP, but if you're on the verge of getting one-shot at all times, then a little bit of max HP goes a long way. Spoiler, I'm going to be using them for the rest of this playthrough because they are so decent that I didn't see a point in replacing them. But that's all the prep work needed before entering Octagonia and its martial arts tournament. We're teamed up with none other than Vince to the Vanquish, who certifiably does not cheat, but notably is another guest NPC who heals you when you drop below half HP and does surprisingly okay damage. Thanks to him and my crippling gambling addiction, I was able to win every one of those 4 fights on my first attempt, which I really didn't expect. I 100% credit the gold chains. There's a few nuances to each of the fights. There are times where you might want to defend before you get hit with a pep power, and it matters who you attack first, but ultimately it's just boring to listen to. The hero went up to level 12 somewhere in the middle, and that's all that happened before I stumbled down into the spider's cave. Octagon is another boss that a lot of new players struggle with. Problem for him is that I bought some okay gear for Sylvando, meaning thanks to the new guest NPC Web, who casts Mitty like his life depends on it, Sylvando wins the 1v1. Octagon might have many terrible moves that can take away your actions or that can wipe your squishier party members, but when it comes to Sylvando, he has nothing that can get through his bulk. Sylvando is using a platinum sword from the casino with flame slash, but he could just as well have been using a cypress stick, a knife or a whip. He really can't lose this. That means 3000 EXP are going towards Sylvando, he's now fully edged and all of Octagonia has been completed without a single reset. Then there's a bit of story which definitely involves wood, but afterwards Jade and Web join the party, which doubles the amount of useful party members I have. Web has sap, which is actually the same as what Veronica was doing. By now, instead of using mid heal I could be using strong herbs, and instead of snooze I can use sleeping hibiscus, so sap really is all he's got in terms of abilities. What makes him useful however is that he doesn't get one shot. Jade has multi-thrust. I ended up going for this build, which is just as much attack using spears as possible. From the casino I can get a lightning lance, which is not that much above the pay grade. You can find a recipe for it one boss from now, but it's much more convenient to get it here. And that's the name of the game for the upcoming 2 bosses. It's not about making them possible, it's about what's convenient, since this is this playthrough's equivalent to a vacation. Especially Jade is so strong for this stretch of the game that she really carries. And that starts with the next boss. How did we get here? I have no idea. I just know that you can talk to an old lady that will let you borrow a cannon in order to blast it at a squid. Tentacular is another boss that some players struggle with, but here it's understandable because he can be quite tough if you don't know about the cannon and another interaction. The boss is made up of the main body and 2 limbs. If the main body is asleep or confused, then the limbs will suffer from the same status effect. They won't get a chance to wake up or snap out of it though. That means if you put the body to sleep, for example with the sleeping hibiscus that I've been hoarding, it absolutely cripples him. What's even worse for him is that the sleep goes through his tentacles attempts at blocking, meaning if he tries to guard, you not only put him to sleep anyways, but the tentacle stops guarding afterwards. And what's even worse than that is his pitiful sleep resistance and his weakness to lightning, or in other words Jade's lightning lance. The only thing you sorta want to watch out for is that you have MP restoring items on someone, because Jade burns through her small MP pool very fast. Now with all of that, it would sure be embarrassing if I had to retry this fight. Well, too bad Jade decided to just kill him on one of my attempts. I didn't really count his HP because I forgot how much HP he starts with if you use the cannon, but look at this clip. He was yellow. It goes to show how strong Jade is at this point. Either way, this results in 6000 EXP for Web. Now there's a bit more story which might involve fish. Either way, the next stop is the town of Phenomenon. Somewhere along the last event we got a harp that allows us to transform the boat into a submarine. Don't ask where the boat comes from. The town of Phenomenon houses a monster and it does monster things, so we travel to another plane, fight our way up the world's least satisfying staircase, and then come face to face with Doa in grey. Now, just in terms of optimizing strats, Jade could have used a non-elemental weapon for this fight, but I didn't bother. You can probably tell how little went into any of my strats here, but I find it hard to master anything for Dowa. She used to be a difficult boss, but the definitive edition of Dragon Quest XI nerfed her into and through the ground. She's a shell of her former self, and all she could muster up in her nerfed form was being slightly annoying by refusing to kill anyone. This means 6400 EXP to Jade. Now what is interesting is that she drops a key, which allows me to get a restorative from the ruins of some town, which is an accessory that I wish I had the stats to upgrade that I'll be using for the rest of this playthrough. It restores 10 HP at the start of your action, which might not sound like much, but you will see just how much it does in this next encounter. There's a town that was frozen over by a witch, so we have to fight Jörmun. You know, Jörmun. The catch is that, like with the tournament earlier, the Luminary has to win this fight by himself. For this one, a lot of previous knowledge comes together. Jörmun has a relatively simple pattern. He does 2 damaging moves followed by a move that buffs his attack and lowers his defense. The damaging moves basically always 2-shot, one can even 1-shot if you allow too many attack buffs, but unlike in the tournament you don't have a guest NPC to help with healing. So how do you win this battle? It's actually quite simple. Remember that flower that I've been gathering throughout the whole playthrough? Sleeping Hibiscus allows you to not only set up buffs like Greatsword Guard, it not only allows you to heal, but it sometimes even allows you to wait out Jörmun's attack buff, resetting it back to 0. It's not guaranteed, but using Sleeping Hibiscus at the right moments makes this possible and even reliable. It's also helpful to carry some magic water and some herbs for healing, but the main thing is reading the pattern and using Sleeping Hibiscus at the right times. It only took 3 retries, the hero gained 2400 EXP and leveled up to 13. I'm very happy about how well it worked out, but trying to optimize a single party member's action here is only foreshadowing for the hardest challenge in this whole playthrough. Either way, Krystalinda is a witch and she's pretty strong. She summons a blizzard and reduces your accuracy, which might tempt you to switch Jade to claws for Hawkeye Claw, but just don't. Spears still far outdamage it. She also has a lot of powerful AoEs, but let's be honest, I have Jade. That being said, this is one of the fights where I should probably have busted out the calculator. I'm trying to feed the skill to the Luminary, which is much easier said than done. The main problem isn't what she does to my party, it's what she does to the Luminary when he pops out. I ended up trying to poison her in such a way that she dies right as the Luminary enters, which worked, but only after 6 failed attempts. 5 of those died to the hero jumping out into instant death, and 1 reset was because I killed her too soon. Either way, that results in the hero getting 8800 EXP and going up to level 16, which isn't intuitive at all, but trust me, it's probably already apparent, but I've done a similar playthrough before, over 4 years ago, and I first thought of it even before that. And this unintuitive idea of feeding these 8800 EXP to the Luminary is the only reason I've come back to it. That is because I'm convinced that I'll reduce the total amount of level ups by 1. 8800 EXP is so much that it gives Jade and Rab a full level up and then some. In my last attempt I gave this skill to Jade, which leveled her up. This time I'm going to be able to save that 1 level and keep the Luminary at the same final level. Now if we look at the description and the rules I laid out back then, one of them is notably not present for this one. No time travel. Also back then I didn't understand horse spinning, else I'd 100% have listed it as well. But the question remains, what is time travel and why do I allow it now? Simply put, time travel is a definitive edition only mechanic that was intended but not built around. You can at any point in the game switch between 2D and 3D mode. But the game will put you at a chapter, which is an invisible story checkpoint. Using this you can go back to an earlier point in the story. But more importantly, it resets chests, meaning it allows you to get multiple of certain items, and there's a strange interaction with this exact point in the game. If you beat Krystalinda, a new chapter pops up that you can travel back to, but the game assumes that beating Krystalinda is the last thing you did in Act 1, meaning this chapter takes place after you found all the orbs. And while we definitely got a couple that I didn't mention, there are still 2 orbs that are missing. But if I travel back to that chapter, the game will immediately give me the key items that I'm expected to have at this point, which includes all the orbs. Now one of them really doesn't matter, but another is guarded by a pretty non-substantial boss, the Elysium Bird. And while it's not worth much in terms of gameplay, it's worth over 4000 points of EXP, which would always result in an extra level. In my original one I gave this kill to the Luminary since everyone else would have gained a level as well. And right now it would seem like the solution to this routing conundrum would be easy. I just have to not kill the Elysium bird, I saved the level on the Luminary and that's that. But there's a good reason I haven't done this despite me knowing about this trick for years. Simply put, I figured that there was no way to practically save a level since giving Krystalinda to the Luminary was out of the question, and because I thought that keeping the Luminary at level 13 was going to make the upcoming section impossible. That is because of a boss that I think I can best introduce by reading out the description I wrote under the video on him from that playthrough 4 years ago. This is the big one. I've been stuck on this for a few weeks and this is one of the hardest bosses I've ever fought in a video game. I very vividly remember how bad that was and I went on to claim that beating him was the hardest thing I've ever done in a video game. And that was at level 16. So the reason I didn't do this playthrough before was that I always figured Tyrion was impossible at any level below 16 and without seeds. But now I ran the numbers and I don't know how I never got this idea, but if I feed Krystalinda to the Luminary, he will still be able to take the XP from the web fight, Tyrion and the Headless Honcho, and he'll just barely still be at level 19, which is what he ended up at in the previous playthrough. That means I can still save that level up and I won't have a much harder time since the only one I'm saving is Jade's. I'm not gonna have to put multiple weeks into beating Tyrion again. But before I can move on to Tyrion and before I can move into Act 2 at all, there's a few more things to prepare. First I have to feed 2 runny exoskeletons to Jade since they're the first mandatory mount. If you lure them into the corner you will get this specific encounter since the game pulls from the up on the plateau enemy pool here. Else more enemies would spawn. They give 692 EXP, which is the minimum I could find for this mount. Up above I made sure to put my pep hops into a party member's inventory. In postgame you get a copy of everyone's inventory at this point and that means I will get 5 more pep hops in case I need them. Now there are 3 more things that I had to go and get. Some enchanted stones, which are non-buyable but also not that uncommon forging material, the defender, an accessory you get for handing in 5 mini medals, and a recipe for one of the equipment pieces that requires enchanted stones to craft. The Pepping pendant, an accessory that gives more max HP than gold chains and less notably some extra MP. Those are all I need, and as I said at the beginning, I don't care about the interludes, and that means Act 2 has officially started. There's still some story, something about an unrelated fish, but after that it's time for Act 2 for real. And Act 2 had the worst start you can imagine. I ran into some vicious slimes on accident and died before I could flee. Whoops. The world is basically ruined in Act 2, but there's some benefits to that. For one, there are new sparkly spots. Rock bomb shards are one example and I'm going to be farming them for an upcoming boss. Another is that the people of Arboria developed stronger weaponry in response to the emerging threats, meaning there's pretty strong store-bought equipment available. What was once your hometown has become the last bastion in humanity's fight against the incoming monsters. And fight them is the very next thing we have to do. The last bit of preparation is that I'm going to upgrade a Mercury bandana. There's a fight coming up where the increased agility helps a great deal with consistency, but I might as well do it now. Earlier I didn't explain the requirements for reworking, and that is because you get enough of the needed currency while playing to not have to worry about it. If I want to rework the Mercury's bandana though, I'll need to conserve them, meaning I'll be restarting whenever I fail to rework it. That means it took me 14 retries until I got to +3. And if that sounds bad, just you wait. The upcoming boss is the Headless Honcho and his henchman. The Luminary is the only party member, but Henrik is a guest NPC that interestingly functions completely different from how he does when he joins you. He can use Forbearance, which is a post-game only ability and completely busted on a guest NPC, but his damage is low. What makes him interesting is a quirk where he will cast mid-heal guaranteed if your HP drops below 50%, but it's only guaranteed if his last action wasn't magic water buff or mid-heal. And while there's still a bit more nuance, mid-heal is the only ability you want to see from him. It helps that you can sometimes manipulate your max HP via equipping the Pepping pendant to force Henrik to cast mid-heal. Now technically if you always cast Forbearance you couldn't lose, but there's no way to manipulate him into casting it, meaning it's entirely up to luck. It's a good thing however that he decided to use Forbearance a lot on my first attempt against the Headless Honcho, which means I won and the Luminary went up to level 17 after gaining 4643 EXP. But this is only the beginning of this segment. There's some story involving a sewer system, but what really matters are two recipes I have to grab in preparation for what's to come. One allows me to forge the King's Coat, which even at +0 is the best armor available right now, and the other is the Demon's Bane. And the Demon's Bane is not only the highest attack weapon available right now, it's possible to upgrade it at my level. It took me 43 resets going for +1, 36 resets going for +2, and no resets going for +3 for some reason. I really got lucky on that one. And now it's time for what I've been scared of. The fight against Tyrion. The last time I was at level 16 and this time I'm at level 17, so it was of course much easier. I can't however say that it was easy. At first glance, Tyrion seems very simple and like there's no point in learning how he functions. You have a single character you control, so just spam attacks and heal when you're low. What else can you do? He's too resistant to all status effects and the Luminary at my level doesn't really have abilities besides Cutting Edge. Well, for one, there are 3 buttons for me to press. Cutting Edge is of course the best damage option. Items include Panaceas for healing, Rock Bomb shards that I've been farming since they not only do almost the same damage as Cutting Edge, but they also hit Tyrion's Shadow, which I'll get to in a minute. And sometimes you might need MP restoring, but it's uncommon. The button I ended up pressing the most however was the holy grail of Tyrion's strats. Defend. While defending, incoming damage is halved, and that sounds terrible. I'm giving up all my actions for the turn to halve the effectiveness of the enemy attacks. To understand why defending can be useful, despite everything you think you know about action economy, we have to first learn a little about Tyrion though. Again, he follows a pattern and at this point it's been engraved into my brain permanently. The first time I fought him I had a little note with this pattern written on it so I'd remember, but by now I know it by heart. He alternates between doing 1 and 2 of these actions per turn, starting with 2 on turn 1. What I want to draw your attention towards is the doppelganger. That's what the fight mainly revolves around. Tyrion by himself is not that problematic. I'd be able to defend whenever he does 2 actions, attack when he does 1 action, and you'd think my victory is ensured. The problem really comes from the Shadow, which outspeeds you and will use one of 2 spells on its second action. Either Kesab to try and slightly reduce your defense, or Umful, which about doubles Tyrion's physical damage. Needless to say, in a normal playthrough you'd attempt to kill it before it gets the chance to cast Umful, otherwise it has such a big impact. I however can't, or at least not reliably. If I were to kill it as quickly as possible, I tend to beat it just a short while before Tyrion summons the next one. This is where defending comes into play though. If a Shadow is still alive when Tyrion reaches the point in the pattern where he would summon the Shadow, Tyrion will skip over it. That means slow playing and killing the Shadow a little bit later will delay the next one by a lot. There is of course a lot more going into this. Tyrion runs out of MP at some point in the battle and after failing to cast it once, will start skipping over Zamel as well, which significantly shortens the cycle. This adds a lot of pressure, meaning after you get 1 action where you know Tyrion will waste his action, you have to then hurry up and finish the battle. Zamel always targets the Luminary, making it do more damage on average than the physical attacks, but if you consider how strong Tyrion with buffed attack gets, it's likely his weakest move. This soft time limit makes the fight a balancing act. You want and you need to slow play to create some downtime between the shadows, but you also need to make progress in the fight. You only have 3 choices: damage, healing or defending, but you always have to pick the right one, taking into account Tyrion's, his shadows and Hendrik's behaviors, and you have to do that for up to 10 minutes and still get a bit lucky on top of that. You can get outsped even if you're wearing the Mercury bandana, and that means Tyrion gets 3 actions in a row. Sometimes Tyrion hits Hendrik with his single target physical attacks instead of you wasting that action. There's Hendrik RNG, and then there's the coin flip between Umfil and Kesab, where Kesab is significantly weaker and might even miss you. There is one last thing to help skew this fight in your favor though. I mentioned how you can swap to a shield when you're not attacking, and equipment swapping extends much farther than that. You can equip HP increasing equipment to make your current HP be less than half in order to manipulate Hendrik into healing you, but then you can even swap it back out when you aren't going to hit your max HP on that turn, and while taking everything into account, it might not always be obvious whether swapping to a restorative for some passive healing is better than the defender that gives you some defense and extra block chance, but I don't want to over explain. Tyrion ended up being quite nice to me. What especially helped was that due to my higher level, agility rolls didn't screw me over nearly as much. That means after only 33 retries I was victorious, and that is something I'm insanely happy about. Now at this point I had 152 retries in total, 126 of which are Tyrion related, which is far less than expected. This fight at level 16 was hell, I can't overstate that. The Luminary gained 10,500 EXP reaching level 19. And from this point onward, the fights are going to get a lot easier for a while. Henrik joins the party at a ridiculous 36, and for this playthrough the build is obvious. A lot of people like axes because they're unique, but with great swords he does a uniquely large amount of damage. Unbridled Blade does 3 times normal damage, which given his insanely high attack with my +3 Demon's Bane is going to be my best damage for a good chunk of the game. Besides that, he has an ability called Double Up, which gives him 2 stages of attack increase, so it's basically Umfl except bad and you can only cast it on yourself, but given how nobody in my party has Umfl, it's gonna have to make do. The next stop are some mountains, where on the way I have to defeat 2 Dragon Riders for 820 EXP and another one for 410. I need their dragons to get to the top where the next boss waits. Here the Luminary has to fight his grandpa in some otherworldly realm, which I bet there's a good reason for, but more importantly this is a lot simpler than Tyrion. For this fight you get a special ability called Quadra Slash that summons and shoots a spectral sword at the old man. Lucky for me that ability doesn't scale, meaning instead of doing way less damage than expected, for once I end up doing the exact intended amount. There's one more trick that makes this fight trivial however. Web summons shadows, just like Tyrion, but unlike back then you don't have a Henrik with you that will kill them after too much time passes. On top of that, the shadows of the spellcaster are exactly that. The physical attacks are a joke, so if you wait out the MP pool they become borderline harmless as Web continuously fails to summon new ones. So of course I won on my first try, and at this point it should become apparent why I fed Krystalinda to the Luminary. He's now only 72 EXP away from level 20, barely at 19, which is what he ended up at in my first playthrough. The only difference is that I saved at 1 level up in Act 1, meaning I'm at 18 instead of 19 total level ups. I really could and should have done this much sooner. Also Web joins, who now has Snooze and multi-heal. All the party members that we join have a set level that they start Act 2 with, meaning their EXP from Act 1 doesn't carry over, and as such they can soak up a lot of extra kills now. The next boss is Arboria, who is so weak that I won't waste much time talking about her. If you really wanna, Web can cast Bounce on someone once Fizzle wears off, and that solves the fight as well. But even without, Henrik is basically so strong that he can 1v1 her using Unbridled Blade, and the main difficulty comes from timing the kill. I accidentally killed her prematurely on one of the attempts, but to my defense, she was yellow. How was I supposed to know? This results in 9,500 points of EXP going towards Henrik, and then Sylvando joins and the game opens up quite a bit. Immediately afterwards you can recruit Erik by sailing out towards the strand, but I didn't, else I'd have to wait for him to die in the next few fights. The first of which is the Restless Knight, aka Daddy, aka the Napping Knight, who is surprisingly vulnerable to sleep. That combines with her general squishiness for a relatively easy kill. I did die once because he parried a whole bunch of attacks, but on the second try Henrik gains 4,000 more points of EXP. Now it was at this point that I remembered something. For the next section we visit the Restless Knights, or in other words your father King Erwin's memories, where we see how Dunwhistle fell, but can't prevent it since we're just onlookers. That being said, even while intangible, you're still forced to fight someone. Barbatos here is a very forgettable fight, so forgettable in fact that I forgot while routing. And he's unskippable. At this point in the game the proof spell isn't available, there's no way to get past him without gaining EXP. Even so, there's one detail that gave me a glimmer of hope. Barbatos doesn't exist in 2D mode. I don't know why, but he doesn't appear at the end of the section. So I switched over to 2D mode, only to be met with a bunch of other enemies. Yeah. Barbatos mightn't exist here, but you definitely have to gain some EXP to get past this. And I'll be honest, this gave me a bit of a meltdown. My immediate reaction was to have intrusive thoughts about spinning horses. But what's the point? If I allow horse spinning now, then sure, just like the speedrun I can skip the Restless Knight, Barbatos, Gloomnivore, Jinx Jade, Puga and Alizarin just in Act 2 alone. But at that point, why not skip as much as possible? I'd skip Krystalinda and not get those levels on the Luminary. So my biggest roadblock, Tyrion, would just get harder if I did. I'd have to beat him with the Luminary at level 15 and that's just not happening. The guy scarred me so much 4 years ago that I made a 36-minute long video about him. Beating him at level 16 is still what I consider to be the hardest thing I've ever done in a video game. There's just no way. In case you're wondering, the main glitch I'm talking about is skipping from Arboria into the first forest, which skips 4 bosses, but it also means that the mermaid from Act 1 is still around in Act 2. She can then give you Lowli's harp, which allows you to go right to Gyldygga as soon as you get the boat. Yes, that would leave the hero at level 18 and it would save 1 level from Krystalinda, but there's no way I'm beating Tyrion at level 15. Not to mention horse spinning skips so much of the run, it would no longer be the full Dragon Quest 11 experience. What else can I do though? If I just complete this playthrough now, then what? I'll end up at the same amount of level ups as the last playthrough, just that the current strat is easier. What's the point in that? Is that worth turning into a video? I tend to position myself against content for the content's sake, and I feel that challenge runs are often scraping the bottom of the barrel. Wouldn't I be doing just that? My question was never whether I could match that playthrough, that's not worth making in my eyes. Not because I couldn't turn to a successful video for my channel standards, but more because it's beneath my personal standards. Damn. And at this point I worked on other projects for about a month until I was able to resolve to do what had to be done. I'll be honest, I would never have even started had I known it would come to this. But I did make a save before Krystalinda because I had a feeling that there was a reason why I never quote unquote figured out that I could give the kill to the luminary. It's time for a reload. I redid the Krystalinda fight and gave the XP to Jade, leveling her up, which only took 1 twice since Jade's so much stronger than the Luminary. I still fed Jade 1 exoskeletons, I redid the interludes, which takes an annoying amount of time, and that means I get another shot at the beginning of Act 2. I'm going to skip over most of the prep work since it's about the same as what it was on my last attempt except longer. I beat the Headless Honcho on my first attempt again thanks to forbearance, and then the forging began. I'm gonna make it short, it took me 268 retries until I got everything at +3, and with that it's time to go back in. The Luminary is now at an agility threshold where Tyrion calmly gets 3 actions in a row and just ends me, which is a huge annoyance. But on only my 3rd attempt something weird happened. I died, but I made really good progress. I got Tyrion down to yellow, and that was very surprising since my confidence was at rock bottom going into this. Again, let's look at the description I wrote back then. I wasn't even sure if it was possible for the longest time, even though I've gotten close with killing shadows instantly. It got significantly easier with the new strat though. Oh. You see, back then it took me ages and I lost an absurd amount of times against him. This fight made me rethink my approach so many times, and as you might know, it's not that easy to get good info on this game. No one told me how he behaves, no one told me how Hendrik behaves, that's all stuff I had to find out via trial and error. And ultimately what got me the win was an innovation to my strat, meaning slow playing and waiting for a whole cycle before I killed a shadow. But I won while that strat was still being developed. At level 16 and an optimized version of an improved strat was all it took. And by now I've polished it to a disgusting degree. I went from being 90% accurate to close to 100. My equipment switching is more precise than ever, I know when he runs out of MP, I see the opportunities to manipulate Hendrik into using mid-heal. I know exactly what damage rolls give me what chance to kill the shadows and how many hits. In other words, I know when to slow play against a shadow and to wait out a cycle, but I understand that there are cases where I can force through the damage to kill it quickly. In short, I learned to play the odds. I wasn't bad at the game 4 years ago. I did that playthrough at all, I had already done a playthrough with all the Draconian quests without weapons. But even so, there's a night and day difference. My character might have been weaker than he was 4 years ago, but I gained 4 years of experience. After only 8 deaths, despite me being so scared of him this whole time, I won on my 9th attempt. All thanks to a more optimized me. It goes to show that strategy is everything. Despite me doing higher damage, the old one was about 50% longer. The current Tyrion fight is close to perfect. It's for sure the closest the gameplay footage of mine has come to being perfect. I'm not able to do it justice here, so I link it in the description separately from the other videos. Most people probably won't understand, but to me, rewatching it now feels like watching a trickshot compilation. Insane RNG combined with 5 years of knowledge from the first time I got stuck on this guy till today, all coming together in these 8 minutes. And this is something I thought I'd never say about Tyrion. It was fun. I thought I knew that Tyrion was impossible below level 16, I was so certain, but in the end, what I thought I knew didn't hold up to what I learned along the way. I've seen the light and I really don't know how to continue the video from what is to me the biggest emotional high I've maybe ever gotten from a video game. First, I have to redo what I already did earlier, so the 3 Dragon Riders, Rab and Averith, which all went without a hitch. This time I recruited Erik, who forgot about the skill tree but he can use items and his spells, and I gave Sylvando the Gold Rush skill, which does around 300 flat damage to all enemies at the cost of a nothing sum of gold. Usually this is the strongest skill in early Act 1, but since I literally got no levels, I can only start utilizing it now after it's already fallen off a little. It's still so good though that I'm going to be using it in postgame, but the main reason I've given it to him now is because I recalculated some stuff, meaning he's getting a few kills right away. The first of which is the Restless Knight. Then Barbatos is the next thing that I haven't covered before. Routing Nightmare aside, it's a mechanically simple fight. Groudwa Slash has enough base damage to make quick work of the add-ons, and for some reason King Erwin's attacks don't wake up sleeping enemies, meaning this is another fight that Sleeping Hibiscus wins for you. The next fight that Sleeping Hibiscus can win for you is the next fight. The Gloomnivore is the monster that's been haunting your dad, and it has a lot of high damage attacks. Sadly, Snooze alongside Sleeping Hibiscus means it doesn't get to do them unless you let it, which I only did once it was time for everyone besides Sylvando to die. So 12,000 EXP went towards him, and you might notice that everything past Tyrion was first try so far. Now technically the Luminary's powers are reawoken at this point, but given how he's at level 18 that's pretty inconsequential. The next stop is Octagonia, where before she joins us we have to fight against Jade, all while fighting the urge to feed our crippling gambling addiction. Just remember that the casino is run by monsters and deals in fake tokens and you'll be fine. Jinx Jade is quite an annoying fight, taking 2 retries because on my first attempt I killed her too soon, and on my second I tried to let my active party wipe for Web to jump in, but then she killed him before he got a chance to act. The strat ended up being to not let the active party wipe to reset the turn, but to instead leave Web in and act on the very turn where she kills the last remaining non-Web party member. Either way, the old man gains 2500 EXP and then I let myself die against Booger. This fight you don't have to do in the same attempt, and it's the only case in the one where I didn't load an autosave. Resource management is one of the big challenges that Booger poses, since he drains your MP and comes after the Jinx Jade fight, but if you restart from a regular save then all that falls out of the equation. He can really screw you over with status effects, but even if he generates a lot of advantage in terms of action economy, the guy's actual ability to kill you is miserable. That made waiting for him to kill everyone besides Hendrik more than annoying, but the fight itself wasn't so bad, meaning 15,000 EXP go towards Hendrik. And that means we finally arrived back home. Oh, sweet relief, the casino is open for real. But I had restraint. I again wanted to AFK farm tokens, but before that I had bigger fish to fry. Jade joined, and while she overall isn't nearly as good as she was in Act 1, she has a really good first showing. During her time with Booger, she learned a new skill that is sure to be useful to us. Multi-feed. Her skill tree expanded, and this layout is the abomination I'm going to use for now. And use it I will, since she's the one this next small fry is going towards. Alizarin here is a chump. He's weak to lightning, and it just so happens that Octagonia sold Storm Spears, upgraded lightning lances. Long story short, he takes 1500 damage from Jade per hit. I also bought dragon slaying swords and great swords, which are useful since most of the bosses left are dragons, but for this guy Jade did the heavy lifting. So 18,000 EXP go towards her, we reach Sniflheim again, but this is where I remember that I have an addiction to feed. I hadn't upgraded my gear for a while, so I'm basically outfitting everyone with stuff from the casino. Notably the spell reflecting gear, since bounce doesn't reflect your own spells in this game. I only remembered the Puerto Valor casino a bit later, so I'm using happy hats instead of liquid metal helmets for now, but that's more than enough for the upcoming stretch. The people of Sniflheim went from being frozen solid to being turned into solid gold. I'd called it an upgrade, but we have to save them regardless. There's 2 fights against golden enemies. The first encounter results in 2950 EXP going towards Web, and the second results in 4884 going towards Jade. After that, you kinda have to keep rubbing this route here while some story happens, but after that, Erik regains the skill tree from Act 1. It's going to be upgraded after the next boss, and that's when I'll give him a proper introduction, but this is a boss I try to take seriously, meaning Gyldygga is the first Act 2 boss that I got pepped up for. Now, as you can probably imagine, I was taking notes while playing, and despite writing down that this is the first boss I wanted to take seriously, my only note on the actual strategy is that I almost fell asleep. There's a little bit of nuance here that I could discuss, especially when she turns your party members to gold, because you can still swap someone out on the action of party members that are immobilized, and since you then know where in the pattern she is, you can counter her wake and break. But I didn't end up doing all that. Instead, I used Divide with Erik 2 turns in a row. The one thing that I thankfully didn't mess up is that I couldn't kill the add-ons. They would have given extra EXP and you don't have to kill them for the fight to end. So I'll just say I ended up giving the 20,000 EXP to Web. But Erik joins and he's someone we can talk about. He has one ability that's borderline mandatory called Divide. That's his biggest selling point. It sets him up to do triple damage on the next action, and it tends to do more than that since you can apply an attack buff between the Divide and the big attack. No matter what weapon you end up using, he does 1.5 times damage thanks to Divide, meaning that while none of his damage options are great by themselves, they all get amplified thanks to being on Erik. Boomerangs are really strong at high levels, but the low attack is a setback, and while I'll be using swords later on since there will be a few really strong ones, the next few bosses are ones that I really want to use knives on. I already introduced Victimizer earlier, but there's another ability called Persecutor that does the same to a sleeping or confused enemy. And remember how I said that using Sylvando to set up Erik is a common strategy? Well, here's a take on that play pattern that you might not be familiar with. Sylvando has a skill called Nastier Knives, which increases the chance of applying status effects with his knife attacks. What you might not know is that it works with all status effects that are applied via physical attacks while he's wielding a knife. And that includes a little ability called Hoverball. That's all I needed to mention before the next boss, the Aurora Serpent. It's a fun boss, one of my favorites because he's strong enough to where you'll struggle if you play normally, but he's so susceptible to cheese. It almost turns into a sandboxy learning experience because so many strats trivialize it. And the one I went for today was to use Hoverball with Sylvando, which is borderline guaranteed to confuse the Aurora Serpent or any sleep effect and to then wake it back up using Erik. Before it gets another action, you could then reapply the status effect, or at least you could if it didn't have so little HP. The boss having too little HP for you to do a funny strat is a first world problem though. 17,000 EXP went to Sylvando, 2,000 more from Vicious 1E Egoskeletons went to Web, the strat to only get 2 to spawn stayed the same, and then it's time for some story events in Arboria that I skipped. Whatever it was, it can't have been important though. We do get a new party member though. Serena got a makeover and can basically cast all spells now. More options doesn't mean that she'll use most of them though, and I ended up almost exclusively using Umflint multi-heal. There's also a really powerful whip that I got via gambling, so I taught her Twin Dragon Lash, which does very little damage, but that's more damage than her spells. Besides that, her skill tree is pretty inconsequential. One panel gives her a chance to cast spells twice, which is neat, but even that's not that meaningful. Don't get me wrong though, she's quite possibly my best party member and also the one that's the farthest from the next level. So, the elephant in the room. In all the gameplay footage, after I took the greatsword off the luminary to give it to Hendrik, he's been running around without a weapon. So of course we need a sword for the guy, and to do that we have to do 2 story things that don't require a battle, and we, of course, have to kill the dragon that's been terrorizing Hordo. We have to fight Tatsunaga not once but twice, although the first encounter is a fair bit easier and shorter. The star of the show here is Jade, thanks to the flashback and crushed ice skills. Crushed Ice is her best damaging move, even better than multi-feet, but it does ice damage, which is her downside against the usually ice resistant cast off bosses in this game. Tatsunaga here however is weak to ice, so it melts him. The ability you might be less familiar with is Flashback. It allows her to dodge and counter every dodgeable single target attack coming her way for 2 turns, and it just so happens that Tatsunaga here mostly uses regular and desperate attacks which Jade happily sends back at him. I gave the first encounters 8400 EXP to Jade, and for the second fight I had to give it to Serena, which was a tad annoying. I ended up buffing her and debuffing Tatsunaga's agility to make sure she goes first, but I still died twice while attempting to give the 21,000 EXP to Serena. That means I can make the sword and then we can go fight Indignus. This guy is extremely slow and therefore extremely easy to cheese, just like the Aurora Serpent, except he has some status resistances. But I didn't even need to go to those lengths. This is the point in the run where I switched Erik to swords. He gets a massive amount of flat attack from the skill tree, which makes this the best option at lower levels, even if Fatal Flash doesn't have a great multiplier. I also gave him a Dragon's Bane and this fight ended up taking less than 2 minutes. It's gotten to a point where I'm not trying to play safe. By now I stopped healing almost entirely just so I can more quickly get everyone in my party to die. That riskier playstyle was the reason for one death, but inevitably 32,000 EXP are going towards Erik. It's very fitting that the route ended up mandating that I give the skill to Erik, and you'll see why in a minute. But before we enter the final dungeon, there's a bit more prep work to be done. I bought myself a Night Cleaver, a Brimstone and a Fireblade, I got liquid metal helmets from the Puerto Valor casino, I got the Sage's Stone from Nautica, which didn't end up putting in all that much work, and that's all I needed. The dungeon only houses 2 noteworthy treasures, the poker and the Stardust Sword, which are going to be the weapons that Jade and Erik use respectively. There are 2 mounts required to get through it though, so I can't skip over it entirely. The last of the Egoskeletons gives 3500 EXP to Web and the Hell Rider gives 1183 EXP to Erik. Now Erik is 1 EXP away from the next level. That's why I really couldn't resist giving Indignus to him. And with that, there's only one more instance of EXP left in the main game. Jasper has a very complex pattern and he's extremely strong stat-wise. That being said, his weakest stat happens to be HP, and while his high agility and onslaught of powerful abilities make it hard to survive, I don't have to survive. I just have to kill him before he kills me. Something else worth mentioning is that I can't kill his add-ons since they give EXP, but besides that, it really did just turn into a damage race. I ended up giving it to Jade, 40,000 EXP resulting in a level up, and this is quite an interesting case. But to understand why I gave this EXP to Jade, I want to show you what my current levels look like. As you can tell, everyone besides Serena's on the verge of leveling up, and even Serena couldn't have taken those 40,000 EXP without leveling up. And there's one more interaction that made me choose this distribution. It's how Veronica's level is calculated once she joins in Act 3. She starts at the same EXP that Serena had at the end of Act 2, and that means if I gave Serena a little more EXP now, Veronica would have joined at a higher level. Serena might be 35,000 EXP away from the next level, but Veronica is currently only 7,000 EXP away from her next level. That's why Jade had to be the one to take this level instead of Serena, even if Serena would be farther away from her next level. There's an argument to be made here about the nature of a level up, but the number of level up jingles would have stayed the same, so it only makes sense to reduce the final level total. And that only leaves Mordragon, a fight that gives no EXP in either phase, meaning I can just focus on playing. Something that's a tad annoying is that I can't easily leave the Palace of Malice since I'd have to beat an enemy to get back up or warp via restarting from the last save. This means I can't easily grab the Meteorite Bracer just yet, although life's not over since I can grab it in Act 3. But this also means I had to do all the prep work before coming here. The first thing I needed was a Night Cleaver for the first phase. Mordragon has a crippling light weakness and hitting that makes Hendrik outdamage the others. I made it a point to kill the shadows almost immediately and I actually started healing. Turns out you can out-heal him pretty easily without draconian quests even at the lowest levels. The reason I wasn't constantly doing this before was because I needed all the party members to be dead by the end of a fight, but now I can play as safe as I want. So the first phase was entirely reliable and there's not terribly much to say. The second phase is a bit more dynamic though. Mordragon is split into 3 mini phases. You start out fighting his tail, which has a very high defense and elemental resistances. You then move on to fighting the head, which has a crippling fire weakness, and finally to a showdown against both at the same time. Each of these sections is separated by a disruptive wave, so you can't get too comfortable setting up buffs, but one at a time. The tail was the first, but it's incredibly short if done right. I went in with Sylvando, Jade, Serena and Hendrik, buffing Jade's and Hendrik's attack on the first turn while healing with Serena, then unloading as much non-elemental damage as I could on the second and beginning of third turn, which is when the tail had to tag out. For the head I switched Hendrik to a Brimstone Blade, I swapped in Erik since he can use a Fire Blade and ended the phase in just one attack from each. For the last phase I switched my approach though. Instead of going for a quick kill I went for a more defensive lineup and used Sylvando's Gold Rush as my main source of damage. The goal was to kill them at the same time, because if you kill the head first the tail can revive it, and if you kill the tail first the head goes berserk. This is also the first instance where I made heavy use of Yggdrasil Leaves just so that a single crit to Sylvando doesn't end the attempt. It took quite long, but only one attempt. Mordragon goes down, giving not a single point of EXP, and with that Dragon Quest XI is beaten with only 19 level ups. After the credits you can go back in time to defeat Mordragon before Act 2 ever starts. And this leads us to another interlude of sorts before postgame starts for real. These are fights with your Act 1 party, but afterwards they will gain the end of Act 2 EXP, with Veronica getting Serena's EXP. For these fights I won't count the level ups, but I will still try and lower the final levels by as much as possible. And for that I have to give these next 2 kills to the only party member that was not on the verge of leveling up by the end of Act 2. That's right, Serena has to get these kills, and if that sounds unlikely to you given her level and offensive capabilities, then you'd be correct. The first fight is against Jasper and he's extremely annoying. He has a shadow veil that the hero needs to disperse via a physical attack with a special weapon. Now consider this. Serena's best damage option is tossing a rock bomb shard. If he's so low that he died to a rock bomb shard and instead of killing my other party members he puts up his veil, then I'm screwed. I'd be in a situation where I have to kill him with the hero in order to get rid of the veil. These 2 fights are where I busted out the calculator. I died twice and had 4 retries where I killed him too soon. One involved an unlucky critical hit, but I finally gave those 6000 points of Jasper EXP to Serena. The other one is Mordragon, and this one actually has some gameplay mechanics. Mordragon tends to put up a veil that prevents healing. I've been playing like it's constantly active for most of this playthrough, but this is a fight where I'd really enjoy the healing. The silver bullet against him however is a little spell called Bounce. If it weren't for that, the fight would be awful. Now in Dragon Quest XI, Bounce is generally strong since it doesn't reflect your own spells, so you can heal as much as you want, but even if you can't heal, Bounce performs above the pay grade since the AI in this game doesn't like hitting itself. This means neither he nor the staffs will cast AoE spells if you have Bounce active on a single party member. My biggest issue was honestly that Serena would get crit right after coming in, but eventually I timed my death with poison killing him before he got a chance to even do that. Praise the calculator. It took 4 deaths, 2 retries from premature killing, but this is it. The rest of Act 3 mostly consists of touching trees or seedlings and preparations for the final boss. And what better place to sharpen my wits than the casino. The Act 3 casino has a couple of nice additions. For one, elfin elixirs. Serena and Veronica learned Mighty Magic Burst somewhere along the way, which is a pep power that consumes all of the MP for 3 times the consumed MP and damage to all enemies. There's also some good defensive gear in the casino. There's Yggdrasil Dew, which I'll be spamming, and remember those pep pops I put into Sylvando's inventory at the end of Act 1? Now I have 10 of those. There's a way to upgrade the poker and the Stardust Sword. I grabbed the Meteorite Bracer, and now all I need to do in order to not get annihilated by Kalasmos is to switch over to 2D mode. This boss has the gimmick that the Luminary can use that sword from earlier as an item to significantly weaken it. This would be borderline impossible in 3D mode. In 2D mode however, using the sword has priority, meaning I can easily get it off. Now I'd love to have a Tyrion-esque story about overcoming the odds here, but look at what I'm doing. I'm throwing around mighty magic bursts and gold rush for damage, the former requiring 2 elfin elixirs and a pep pop each time. I'm using Yggdrasil Dew almost every turn. This is consumerism at its finest. The strat wasn't all that deep, which might seem anticlimactic, but as you all know, it's not about the destination. It's about Tyrion. I barely lost it all after the big guy, that's just how much of a confidence boost I got. After beating him, I rode that high all the way to the finish line. It's been 4 years where I thought I knew everything about this game. I made hours upon hours of guides and decided I had already figured out everything that there was to know about Tyrion. I thought I had done everything I could, that there was nothing more to attempt, but looking back, this was the opposing mentality that started a lot of these runs. I remember people telling me that rank quest 11 with the player characters permanently at 1 HP would be impossible. I remember people telling me that all draconian quests with no weapons would be impossible. And I remember over the last 4 years telling myself that Tyrion at level 15 would be impossible. And now I remember each time proving them wrong. I ended up beating Kalasmos on my first attempt. He gives no EXP, so these are the final levels. I not only reduced the total amount of level ups by 1, but I decreased the final level by 2 more since I gave Serena that 1 level in my last playthrough. I was ignorant of how Veronica's level ups were calculated until I was done. This time I ended at 17 level ups on the hero and 2 on Jade. With horse spinning I could have reduced the total amount of level ups by 2, saving both Jade levels again, but if I did, Serena would have to be the one to gain the 40,000 EXP from Jasper, meaning Veronica would join at a higher level and the final levels in Act 3 would stay the same. The fights that you don't skip would play out exactly the same though, and the hero's level is unaffected. Especially since the bosses you'd skip include a few interesting ones, and I bet at least one person here didn't know that you don't have to refight Jinx Jade when loading a save normally after Booga, or you didn't know how much Jade can melt Elizabeth. I feel that something would have been lost along the way. The later strategies that would have made up most of a run with horse spinning are in my opinion the less interesting ones, since as player power increases the game becomes very self-centered. This way I think the video has an educational factor, and I link some quality resources down below in case you're wondering about resistance data or specific calculations. If you want to learn about patterns, then you have to look them up on a Japanese site, or you can check out my boss guides, although be warned, those videos have the world's worst audio, so better watch them on mute. I'm really glad that I knew most of the things required for this playthrough ahead of time and basically didn't have to look up anything, because looking anything up is pretty painful right now. And that's all for me. Technically there's more to be done in this playthrough. Time Realm is still a thing, but I don't want to route Tickington and I'm unsure of whether that fight is even possible, so this is a great point to leave this playthrough off. Have a good one. And remember to believe in your ability to be Tyrion.